Hello, friends of the internet. Welcome to this webinar about DXP, Modern DXP. Really happy to be here. We're just going to chat for a bit while we're waiting for some more folks to kind of trickle in here. We've got quite a few people, but usually people are a few minutes late. So I just thought this is a good time as we were waiting for people to join for, just have a little bit of a banter about, what's going on in the world today. And I know personally for me, just my COVID puppy is an espresso machine, new espresso machine. And I am wired, and like these cups get drained pretty fast. So thanks for joining today, Kaya. I have Kaya Ismail today coming. And where are you joining from today, Kaya?
Thanks for having me, Joel. I'm calling in from Dubai, UAE. I'm usually based in London, UK. But since you're the first to mention COVID, I'll go ahead and give the very short version of the story. We were here, me and my family, when things first started getting crazy back in March 2020. And we had a flight back on March 27th or 28th, and the airports got closed the day before the flights were. So we were essentially stuck here. But it sort of accelerated a process that we were already on, which is, maybe spending some more time in this part of the world rather than back in London. It's definitely accelerated things quickly, but we're still here. We did visit once before back to London. We're planning a visit again, hopefully, when the flights allow for us to do so. But yeah, that's my story of where I'm calling in from.
Wow, so the airport is actually closed down.
That was last year. Now it's fine, but the UK have actually banned flights from a lot of areas of the world, including this one, a lot of airports, shall I say. So until they re-allow those flights to resume, there's no real way back unless I pay a hefty quarantine fee in the UK for a not a very nice hotel stay, I hear.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, I'm glad to have you with us here today virtually. And this is actually almost better because, it would be pretty inconvenient for me. Although I would be happy to come visit you anytime in Dubai.
Anytime. You're welcome to.
Yeah. Hopefully soon. One place I've never been. So that's cool.
Yeah, I'll show you around. There's definitely some nice coffee places we can check out.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Joel Varty. I'm president CTO here at Agility. Joined today by Kaya Ismail. Kaya, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So thanks again for having me, Joel. My background in this space specifically, I've been a journalist and commentator on the space for 8, perhaps almost 9 years now. Wow. Initially, I started off with a publication called cmscritic.com. I was writing there for about three and a half years. I was editor towards the end of my stint there. After that, I started writing for cmswire.com, and I still do. Again, journalistic basis, commentary basis on the web CMS industry and related industries. And around the same time that I began working with CMS Wire, this was around 2016, I launched my agency Wordify, and we focus on helping CMS vendors, DXP vendors, and companies adjacent to that industry with their content marketing, their content strategy, their messaging, and all that good stuff. Anything written, basically, we help them with that. And more recently, we launched a DXP report. So that's at dxpreport.com. And that is a free weekly newsletter about the DXP space, as the name implies. So that's my background.
Awesome. This is great. And, we're in an industry where it's, I don't know, like many industries, tons of acronyms out there. CMS, content management system, or content management software. DXP is one of those ones that we encounter a lot. We also have like WCM, which is web content management, ECM, enterprise content management. Yes. I think that every time anybody has like a new like mini vertical or something, we have a new acronym. The DXP stands for Digital Experience Platform. And there's on the Agility channel, we have basically a video that goes through the slideshow I'm going to take you through right now to kind of go through what is DXP and sort of introducing a concept that I've been calling Modern DXP, although I've been reading some other stuff in the industry that calls it Composable DXP. If you were to define it, Kaya, how would you do that?
So Composable DXP is the latest way of describing this particular set of technologies. If I was to describe a DXP, there are 2 ways you can go at this. The one I prefer is the digital experience platform is that sort of foundational piece, or the spine, if you will, of your digital technology stack, essentially. So a DXP, how, again, Gartner and Forrester are looking at things, it's essentially a headless CMS, which is a content management system that has been decoupled from the front end. We just left with the back end, driven by APIs. And what that essentially allows you to do is to have that relatively lean and agile CMS there that handles your content management, that can then integrate with pretty much anything else. So you want to have a CRM on top of that, ERP, e-commerce platform, personalization engine, anything else. The APIs, I like to think of it like APIs being the glue, the microservices being glued together by those APIs. So when you have that headless CMS, it sort of acts as that foundational piece that can be built on top of. That's how I like to see things.
That's a great explanation, and I'm really glad that I asked you to explain it, because you've done an amazing job. I hope we have that recorded so we could like transcribe exactly what you've done. Where we're coming from in this industry in the DXP is what I call the all-in-one promise, or we've heard this called monoliths. We've also heard it called suites of packages. But it's basically trying to put all the services that you just talked about that can be API driven, all of them in one box. And these are things like, obviously, CMS tends to be the center. Everybody needs content. UGC, which stands for user-generated content, that goes in there. E-commerce goes in there. We just keep adding these things to the box, right? Marketing automation, like the ability to send emails and do lead generation, personalization, and there's more and more and more. Audience management, analytics. I don't even know when you have this as a feature. AI, ML management. I'm not sure exactly what that is. Search is a feature. So tons and tons of features, and I've listed like a few. So there are packages out there that have all of these things that if you subscribe to it or if you buy the product, you get it all. It's the all-in-one. But that, as a digital experience platform, I think comes with some problems, and we've talked about this quite a bit, Kaya. And I've just got about two or three quotes here. So this is from kind of a vendor point of view, where it's an ultimate all-in-one package. Sure, you do get what you pay for. It's a lot. It's usually a lot more than you might need. And this is what I've seen in my experience in the industry. Coming from Agility's been around for enough time that we've seen vendors kind of start from one spot and then grow into these suites. It's usually by acquisition and sometimes by development. But here's another good quote here. This one's from Gartner. So this is an article that I just recently found where it talks about composable DXP. So application leaders struggle with cumbersome and time-consuming integrations and rollout of monolithic DXPs. This is part of like Gartner's reporting on the state of DXP, which is really interesting, I believe, because they changed the Magic Quadrant for CMS this year. I'm not sure if you're aware of that one, Kai, or if you want to comment on that.
It's interesting, isn't it? It came about a year earlier, or a year or two earlier than I was expecting it to be honest. I didn't expect them to sort of jump on the DXP bandwagon as quick as they did, to be honest. But what it has done is it has cemented this idea that, as well as this article, by the way, which you shared with me, which kind of shocked me. We can maybe share that in the chat so people can access that. But what it does is, like I mentioned, it sort of cements this idea now that we are moving towards a more agile, microservice-driven, API-driven technology stack that runs against the grain of traditional legacy suite platforms, however you want to label them. Now, while I do admit that there are still good use cases for suite platforms and legacy platforms, and they do still have their place in the world. What Gartner has done, and I think Forrester is doing something similar, is changing the narrative to, again, put their sort of weight behind this idea or this notion that businesses need more agility. Businesses need to be able to sort of build their own technology stacks without having something out of the box that they're not necessarily going to use ever, or maybe not this year or next year, to bring down costs, to make things more agile for internal employees, to make things more agile for end users. So that's what we're seeing here. And I think it's just a reflection of what's going on in the market, essentially.
Yeah, and I've really experienced that same kind of a trend of people coming, and especially with the idea of you talked about headless CMS, of I want headless CMS for my enterprise. And that's usually the first thing. We're not seeing as many people talk about DXP, but I expect, as that catches up, as that concept catches up, we're going to see that more. This is another interesting quote that I had from a partner, actually. So my customer was paying 6 figures a year to get a feature they hadn't even turned on yet. And this was a frustration from a development partner point of view for someone integrating one of these DXP suites, where the customer was sold something to say, hey, do you have this? Do you have that? And I think it was personalization was one of the biggest ones. And, a really, really expensive part of that package, it's like, and can bring a lot of benefits, but huge time to roll out and huge sort of ongoing costs. And, you don't necessarily, if you don't need it, why are you paying for it?
That's right. And I think a lot of this stems from brands not really knowing where they actually stand from a human resources perspective and a strategy perspective. So what they see is they'll see this sweet CMS out there. They'll say, oh, hey, it's got personalization features, which means once we finally roll that out, we'll be doing personalization just like Amazon does, right? But really what happens is you need a lot of strategy, a lot of people power inside building personalization specifically. You need a lot of people creating content at scale in order to sort of push that content across channels, to segment that content and tailor that content to each different segment of your audience. That is a really sort of big deal. And you can't just do that very easily. And simply acquiring content that has a personalization engine or personalization features, you're not necessarily going to be able to take advantage of that, even if you really want to. So a lot of the issues are stemming from companies not really being honest or not really even being aware that, we're not really at that stage yet where we can, create, 17 articles per week, each one for each of our different 17 customer personas, right? Because that's what real personalization looks like, or different product, product descriptions or banner types, they're not at that stage in terms of their growth, in terms of their revenue. They haven't got a strategy in place to handle that even. So they go and get that suite and they realize that, wow, this is a great feature that we just will not use for at least another year, at least another 2 years. Yeah. And as your customer was saying, paying six figures for things like that is a pretty big deal. And outside of personalization, you mentioned before, AI and ML, right? Artificial intelligence, machine learning. Again, a good way to get sort of sucked in to maybe buying a product that offers that as a sort of a side feature. But what that really is AI is being used to do things like automatically tag content, automatically tag images. So if you're a company that's got thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of images that have to be uploaded, for example, like maybe some stock photo companies, for example, that could be extremely useful and beneficial. And so for that kind of company, it's a great feature to have. But for a lot of companies, that kind of feature is not really going to be needed that often, at least. And sort of to pay, again, if you're paying six figures, something like that, just to have that feature bundled in there, it's probably, the ROI there is not going to work out in your favor, really, if at all.
And that's a good point. Yeah, talking about the ROI, one of the things that we're going to get to in a few minutes is to understand, maybe you do need that feature, but maybe there's, a couple of years into your solution, you actually find out that there's another vendor that comes out with a better version or a cheaper version of that can provide more value. Composable, Modern DXP, we want to show how we can use those best of breed vendors. So we've learned the lessons, mostly the hard way. I mean, I think that you and I both have had lots of stories of folks where we've been working on this kind of stuff and seeing actual customer stories. So let's continue digging in. So let's look at, we're calling this Modern DXP. I love the term composable DXP as well. It's kind of a different approach that you've been talking about, Kaya. So I think of it as pieces of a pie. Agility is a CMS vendor. We're a headless CMS. We see ourselves as one piece of the pie. Oftentimes people come to us first, especially enterprises that are looking to build a new website or do new digital properties, like different apps or whatever. And we say, hey, we're one slice of the pie and we're going to help you fill out the rest of it. But how many slices you want is a big decision. And then how many slices do you actually need? And I think that comes back to what you're saying about like the features that you need now versus the features that you think you want, because there's something that's like, hey, we want to get to this future vision, right? Yeah,
exactly. And I think it's ambitious and it's great, and it just has to be sort of managed, right? Especially when it comes to, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, let's be real, on things that, you may not need for another 12, 24 months. So it has to be thought about, now rather than after the fact.
Yeah, and I love these conversations if we can get it into this conversation before people have spent a ton of money on stuff, because they can sometimes reconsider and use that money to actually spend and find the services. So, some of the observations, and you already mentioned this, every business needs a CMS, and I think DXP often starts with CMS. But the needs do vary after that. And then I really liked you talked about APIs. I think everything is basically a service with an API. I think that's how we should think of things, as opposed to a package that I need to sort of dig into or something like that. I'm not really sure how people think about software and how they kind of visualize it. And I think services with APIs are really hard to visualize. We used to think of like a box that you'd pull off the shelf, and we would try to like visually represent that when we sold software, you know, a decade ago or even 2 decades ago. But I don't know, how do you visualize kind of the, like APIs from a lesser, like how does someone who doesn't ascribe to sort of being a technologist, how do they think of that as a service that you pay for? Yeah, so again, I mentioned before, I sort of see APIs as the glue, right? The glue that sort of glues together the different microservices that you need, right? Which is different microservices you need today and tomorrow. And this is where the difference between maybe a suite or a legacy monolith platform, the difference between that and maybe an agile CMS comes into play. If you take 2020 as an example, with the pandemic, a lot of brands suddenly needed to pivot in many different ways, right? Internally, they need to pivot the ways that people are working, workflows changed. Externally, if they had brick and mortar stores or physical experiences, suddenly those experiences had to be online. So essentially new technologies had to be brought in. With APIs, that is a lot easier to do. It's a lot easier to pivot quickly because the API is essentially, it's like a universal language between software. It's again another way to look at it, right, where one app can talk to another app and integrate and share data between the two apps. And it's, you know, it's essentially like it's an integration. Integration takes place when that communication is there. So when you're with an agile CMS that is API driven, it's a lot easier to communicate with these brand new apps that you didn't have to use 2 months ago, but suddenly, you know, your business is extremely reliant on them. So that's how I see APIs. They're a communication between different apps, and they make it easier to make brand new communications or new integrations very, very quickly. Whereas in the past, integrations would be something that could take months. That's pretty much how I see it. Okay. My last thing is, I believe everything needs to be fast. And this is a personal one for me. What I have seen from folks coming from more traditional CMS platforms and some of these DXP platforms is fast is, to me, a couple of different things. It needs to be fast sort of when you build it and you have, you know, a website or an app, that needs to be fast itself in terms of the user experience. But I think fast should mean fast to get things going, a phased approach. How can we go from 0 to, you know, phase 1? How can we do that quickly? And I believe with an API-based approach, that's easier to be fast.
Yep.
So you've been talking about APIs, and I really love your definitions. You're pretty good at explaining things. You should do that as a job.
I try my best.
So to me, this is what I believe are the essentials, and I'm interested to hear your opinions on this, Kaya. So we both agree that Headless CMS is kind of the foundation. Of course, you know, I work for a company that really believes in agility and digital agility, and we named the company after it. So, you know, I believe in empowering marketing and delivering great content, and that's what Agility CMS is all about. There are lots of other Headless CMS platforms, and we even work sometimes with customers who have multiple Headless CMSs in, you know, because they're a huge corporation, they might have different departments that actually use different CMSs, and that's okay because they're just services with an API, but they kind of form the foundation, I believe. So the next one, I believe that marketing automation is like essential for every single business to have some kind of way that you need to basically convert your users to leads, nurture them with emails, stuff like that. Everybody's sending out emails. You should have a way to do that. I didn't write Mailchimp on here, but people use Marketo, people use ActiveCampaign. What's your experience with these tools, Kaya?
Mailchimp is probably my go-to. We're actually using MailerLite, which is a different one for our current newsletter, DXP report, which I love. But Mailchimp is probably my go-to if I'm from a larger company looking for something a bit larger. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is basically, you know, you have forms on your website, some kind of place to send your leads. Now you can also send them directly to what's called a CRM. So I believe every business should have some kind of Headless CMS, some kind of marketing automation, and some kind of CRM. I absolutely don't believe that you should put them all in one product. HubSpot I have on here. We've used HubSpot as a CRM, and you can use it as marketing automation. It does also claim to be a CMS. It doesn't claim to be headless, I don't think. It's really not a CMS in terms of how I consider that. But all of these products have their own kind of ROI that they can bring. And by mixing and matching even just these three, you can really build an incredible suite of tools that can really change your business.
So Joel, let me interrupt you here and challenge you. Why shouldn't they all be in the same product? So if there's a product out there that says, hey, we've got the CMS, we've got the marketing automation and the CRM all in one, there's no need for you to go out hunting for anything else. Come use us. So what's the counter argument there? Why is it better to actually build your own sort of suite rather than buy one?
Yeah, good point. And and I think HubSpot is a good example of that, where they kind of do pretty good CRM, pretty good marketing automation. Well, actually, really good. They lead the industry in some cases, and they also have a version of CMS. The problem is if you buy into all of that, then you're kind of stuck with their implementation of it, right? And that might work for you, and it might work for your business right now, but it might not work for you in the future. And so if you think of it as that composable set of services in terms of your entire solution, it could be that it's like, you know what, HubSpot doesn't work for me anymore. I want to switch that out, and I want to use Salesforce. We actually switched from HubSpot to Salesforce. Now we use something called Pipedrive, because our business at the time, that's what it uses. And a lot of times it's personnel. So you have someone is like, you have a VP of growth, they come in, they bring in Salesforce, and that's fine. It doesn't mean you need to throw away every other tool. If you just had one suite, say you had, you brought on Adobe AEM and you were bought into the whole thing, and that was your corporate strategy. Now, if somebody comes on and says, but I need to solve this problem, and the only way I can solve this problem was with this other tool, then that doesn't necessarily fit into your strategy. So being a little bit more dynamic, I think, is really important. What's your opinion on that one, Kai?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think you mentioned something really important, which is, it's not just about today, it's about, the future as well. So while that suite with the Headless CMS, marketing automation, CRM, and whatever else they have in there, it may be a perfect fit for you today. It's important to understand and to remember, again, 2020, the pandemic, and it doesn't have to be a pandemic, but just general business growth and market changes. Your business will have to adapt at some point and pivot at some point. There may be a new tool, in this case, maybe a CRM that comes out that is, extremely cost effective and has even more features than the one you've got in your suite. And it's a lot easier to use, but suddenly you can't use that because, firstly, you can't convince your CEO to buy one when you've already got one. And secondly, it just doesn't fit in with your suite the way it's set up. So if you've got something, again, composable, agile, headless, however you want to talk about it, a DXP, something that was built from the ground up to have things swapped and changed and connected very easily whenever you want to do that, that allows you to say, okay, we're sorted for today, but we're also sorted whenever we want to change things. So I think that's a really important concept that brands should think about too.
Yeah, I know that for us, we were recommending for a long time, we were recommending, and we still recommend Marketo to a lot of folks, and Mailchimp. But the question came, well, I have a lead that comes in and I want to know all the places that they've been on my website. What were the UTM codes that sent them there? And then once they get into, because this customer also has their own SaaS product, and when they get into the product, I want to see what they do there. And their current tools weren't allowing that. And then we found ActiveCampaign for them that actually has that built in as a feature. It's like drop the code into your product and it works. And then, so they were already using Agility, which was fine. They were able to swap it out. And the ROI from that was huge because they were able to now directly work on their conversion rates, right? So this is why these three tools, I believe, are the essentials. But let's talk about some more, because these seem pretty obvious, but there's some other ones that maybe they aren't so obvious about what you're going to need. So you mentioned the pandemic, and I think there's two things that are important there. One is, wow, e-commerce, right? Wow, Shopify. Oh my gosh. So many people are now sort of flocking to e-commerce, and I'm seeing headless e-commerce as like an emerging trend through that, because it's an API driven service that you can add on to your existing, products. So you could have it, like I'm seeing people are using Shopify to do like in-game purchases. They're using it to do, purchases anywhere, adding it to their current website, all kinds of stuff. Really good. BigCommerce is another one that a lot of people are doing stuff. The other side of it is that, e-commerce might seem like an obvious thing now, especially now that we've kind of entered like pandemic mode, and, people can't, in Ontario, we're in what's called a lockdown, and, the stores are closed. But it also means that like, this is a sign of, wow, how being agile is smart, right? We were forced to take an agile sort of pivot. Everyone said, hey, we're going to close the stores. We're going to put our products online. We were forced to do that. there are a lot of opportunities in businesses to bring more ROI from their products by being a little bit more decisive about their pivots. Obviously, I'm not trying to say, hey, you need to change direction with your business all the time. What I'm saying is, if you're going to decide to do something, go ahead and do that other thing. And I'm seeing that as a trend, especially with Headless CMS, where it was just a kind of a, not sure if we want to do that. But, you know, that's different from how we've been doing our business in the past. But now, like, okay, the benefits are clear. The ROI is right there. Why are we waiting? Let's pull the trigger.
Yeah, I think it's I think people are starting to realize it's not necessarily a technological shift or technological evolution. It's actually a cultural and a philosophical and a methodological, I hope I said that right, evolution. Yeah. In a sense of, you know, previously you could afford to have that suite and to just use those, you know, pre-built, pre-baked products within the suite, and you didn't really have to delve outside of those. But things, you know, the internet was still in its growth stage, still is. But I think last couple of years we've seen that the ability to be agile, you know, the ROI is it can't be argued against. You know, when it comes to things like the pandemic, when it comes to things like a new device hitting the market, new channels hitting the market, new touch points need to be, you know, fed content and have marketing information on there. The ability to be able to do that quickly than your competitors is, you know, it's invaluable essentially. So that is a cultural shift that's happening, and the technology is kind of just sort of facilitating that cultural shift. That's what I'm thinking of seeing here.
That is, yeah, that's a great way of putting it. You know, it's like we often talk about technology as it's the thing that was driving the decision, and that's not what drives a decision. You're right. It is cultural. It's ideological. It's a paradigm shift, and I think that's really happening quickly. Let's talk about personalization, because this is a big one, because I think that this is probably one of the main reasons that people get sucked into the idea of a suite, because it's really hard to do. Personalization is not an easy thing, first of all, to visualize. Like, what's the outcome going to be? Oh, I'm going to increase my conversion rate by 75%. Awesome. I want that thing. But actually implementing that and having a team, you talked about, is like, well, how much volume does your team need to do just to do this? Maybe it's not even in your wheelhouse, right? You're not going to get any ROI by having to hire more people. Exactly.
I mean, I agree with you. It's definitely one of those features that everybody wants to have, or one of those things everyone wants to do. Every brand wants to be able to do this. You know, they look at Amazon sort of leading the market, or leading all sorts of markets now, and their personalization engine, their ability to personalize almost every experience is a major factor there. And brands know that, and brands see that, and brands want to emulate that. The problem is, personalization again is not really a technological issue. It's a people issue. Do you have enough people to do this? And it's a strategy issue. So when I say, do you have enough people, to try and give some perspective to this, to personalize an experience for, you know, let's say 4 different personas, to really personalize it on the level that, you know, brands really want to, especially enterprise brands, which is giving each person their own experience, their own messaging, custom and tailored to their behavior on the site. Not their cookies anymore, cookies are gone, but their, you know, everything that they know about that customer. To be able to do that, you have to take the content you're creating currently, so you and your brand, and just for 4 personas, you have to quadruple it, right? Quadruple the output. And then you have also, at the same time, you have to think about all the different channels. So if you're writing, you know, marketing content for these 4 different personas, how is that marketing content going to appear on the mobile device, on their smartwatch, on a smart speaker, on a digital sign, wherever they may be? So you have to figure all that stuff out while at the same time scaling your content output drastically. And that's just for 4 personas. If we're talking about enterprises, they've got more than 4 personas, right? They've got a lot of people they're trying to target, and they're trying to get as granular as possible. That's the whole point of personalization. The more granular it gets, the more ROI you will get. Doing something that's not doing personalization that's not very granular isn't, you know, it almost defeats the purpose. So it's a tough one that is not necessarily solved by technology. Again, technology will facilitate it, but if you don't already have it there, i.e. the people power and the strategy to do that at scale, and we can't underestimate just how much scale is needed here for a real enterprise-grade personalization strategy, then you're kind of wasting money. Let's be real. You're not going to be able to do it in the next year or 2 based on where you are. And that's why it's important for brands to evaluate themselves, because a lot of brands are there. And for those brands that are there, by all means, go ahead and get those products, because they do work a treat if you are capable of producing that amount of content for that amount of personas, that product is there and it's serving a lot of enterprise companies. It's serving them well. But a lot of companies are falling into that trap of the dream, and they're just not there yet. And they may be there in 2-3 years time, but they're just not there yet.
Yeah, I like it works a treat. That's a great phrase. So having done a lot of research myself with, first of all, Google, you can use Google Optimize in for a lot of the things that you do. And if you're thinking of experimenting with personalization, especially something like simple geo personalization, where it's like, hey, visitors from Canada, they get this, and visitors from Dubai get that. Very, very simple. And that's stuff where you can do pretty some experimentation on that. You can use Google Optimize, and actually there's some articles on the Agility help site to help you do that with Agility. But there's a company from Finland called Frosmo, and I've seen the demos that I have seen from them are kind of mind-blowing, where they use AI with the personalization as you go through things to do kind of like if you want, it's like you mentioned Amazon. To me, it reminds me of Amazon, how smart their personalization is. It doesn't come cheap, but I think it's probably worth every penny if you have the capacity as an enterprise to take advantage of it. So I love having those conversations with folks, because when you're talking about composable modern DXP, it's a great conversation, because you're talking about how their business can grow. Your business can grow into the future into something where this is a viable option. And here's something you can start with now, but let's not hold up your whole project for that, or make you put a big outlay of cash out that you don't need to. So that's a good one. Personalization is something we can talk about all day.
Yeah.
The other one is search. So search is a thing that it typically, with traditional CMS, it tended to be built in. It was one of those things that was in the suite. And I have to say, having had that built into Agility at one point, and we since kind of threw it away, it is almost impossible to get that just right in the CMS for how every customer needs it. And the offerings that have come out, this is kind of like the perfect case for APIs and services that you can swap in and out, because the offerings from Elastic and Algolia, now Elastic has bought, they bought SwiftType, and they've kind of done a lot of acquisition, a lot of R&D. Those products, first of all, some of them are free, so you can get started. And all of these APIs pretty much have like free to try type things, but just incredible search products that they have when that's valuable to you. And on some folks, it's like, yeah, I don't need search on my website, or I need they actually want better SEO. They want to show up on Google and Bing better, right? Which is a whole different set of things and strategies. So now these are the add-ons that I think are important. What have I missed, Kaya, from your point of view?
What we've got is we've got e-commerce, personalization, search. I mean, CRM is another. I think we had CRM before, and we had CRM, ERP.
We talked about CRM.
So, yeah, PIM. So product information management is another large one if you're dealing with a large amount of products. What else comes to mind? Those are the main ones that I'd have in there. None of us are coming to mind, really. How about yourself? Is there anything else that we've missed, that I'm missing?
Well, so the interesting thing that I don't talk about here, and didn't talk about in the video about DXP, is hosting. And I think it actually is a really important sort of piece, is where do you put your website? And one of the main things about DXP, let's just see if I actually have any, I don't have a slide on hosting. Swap out the services as needed. That's really important. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Go ahead and watch the video about this. This is about DXP, and definitely let's continue the conversation. But just talking about hosting. So typical sort of DXP suites don't necessarily give you the ability to do things like cloud hosting, or they'll be very like, you can put it on, it has to go on AWS, or has to go on Azure, and it has to be like this. And there's a whole lot of ramp up. And a lot of sort of resources that need to be managed. So you actually kind of have to be either hire someone to do all that for you, or kind of look after that forever. Whereas with the sort of services-based approach, you can use some of these newer tools. We're seeing things like Netlify and Vercel come out, where they have you can often run most of your site for free to get started, to see how it all is going to work, and then come in at the right enterprise level. They all have enterprise offerings that are really, really good, that just take care of all this stuff for you. So I think hosting is one of those ones where it sometimes kind of goes under the radar and doesn't come out first. But I've been actually lately, like in 2021, more people have been coming to me and says, "Hey, I want to host my site on Netlify, and I want to use Headless CMS, and we've heard about Agility. Tell me about, and sort of teach me about this." And that's kind of like, we come in as educators into the industry. And I think, Kaya, we rely on you a lot, because you have a bird's eye view of a lot of different vendors and a lot of different customers. what's your kind of opinion on like the overall sort of bringing people to this space?
Yeah, so I think carrying on from what you said from like a cloud perspective and being able to sort of choose, having that freedom to choose different cloud hosting platforms, I think that extends out to just technology in general, right? So really what we're advocating for here is freedom, right? Technological freedom, the freedom to make those cultural changes that we were talking about previously. Whereas a suite or a monolith will constrain you or restrain you from making those cultural shifts that are needed. And by the way, those cultural shifts are often, or they should be at least, reflecting what's going on in the market, right? Consumers, whether you're B2B or B2C, whatever consumers want, that's where your culture should be shifting to serve them better, to serve them faster. So being able to have that freedom to make those adaptations and cultural shifts and paradigm shifts whenever needed and however needed, that's the real sell here, right? That's where the ROI is actually. It's not necessarily about monetary ROI instantly. It's about, being able to have that freedom to make all those cultural shifts, all those cultural changes, and have the technology, and then choose a technology to support you when it's the best time. Not just, buying the pie, as you mentioned earlier, and eating it, 2-3 years down the line. You could buy a slice at a time. So that's how I see this. That's how I see what the value is. And going back to what I mentioned, or what you mentioned with the cloud hosting, and me saying that's sort of a broader thing for technology, being able to choose, or your developers being able to choose what technologies to use for each different project is another really massive factor that I'm seeing, at least with different brands sort of moving away from suites. They may want to use Flutter over here for this project. They may want to use Next over there, React Native over there. Having the freedom to do that is, again, going to please your developers, because they're going to be able to use all the tools that they love and they want to use for these projects. And similarly, it's going to allow your developers to choose technologies that are going to serve the customer better, right? In certain instances, one technology will just simply be faster or better for the customers, depending on what's happening in that environment. Progressive web apps, for example, single page applications, all these different types of technologies, depending on the project, depending on who's going to be using them, your developers have that freedom. If you're using a sort of a headless CMS, they're going to have that freedom to choose, make those choices, and use those technologies as and when. So again, for me, the bottom line, that the word is freedom, and I think it's freedom on a lot of different levels, and it's freedom to make those cultural shifts, to make those technological selections as and when it's the best time for your company. So yeah, I'm going to stick with freedom as my go-to word here, Joel.
Yeah, and I really like the way you're talking about the idea of it's not necessarily about monetary ROI. Although I do think that is, but it's like saying, hey, the whole point of our company is profit. Well, profit is an outcome. That's an end point, right? It's a result. Whereas we're like, what are we trying to achieve? It's like, oftentimes like we should be considering the customer experience. Isn't that the most important thing, especially when they're interacting with our brand digitally, which is really what we're talking about right here. We want to see, give them the best experience and give them what they need. And this is why I think sort of that got extended a little bit with e-commerce this year for a lot of folks. It's like, now we need to, in order to give them the experience, I'm not going to see them face to face. We need to give them a digital experience. Same thing with conferences. Platforms like Hopin have just gone crazy this year. And actually starting to decline again as the idea of in-person conferences come back. But honestly, we're using a platform called Demio. Without platforms like this, we're currently, I'm currently doing a talk with Kaya, who's thousands of miles away, and it's almost seamless. So, and I'm really thankful that we can do that, because I can learn about the idea that it's culture, not technology, that's driving the decisions. And I think that this is why I wanted to be able to do more talks on here that are not necessarily just towards developers, because we're all part of that cultural shift, I believe, that is kind of happening. And it happens whether we like it or not, right? Whether we're part of it or not, it kind of sweeps over everything. And it's just a matter of whether your business adopts that as it comes along. And then it's like, sometimes we're trying to trail and catch up to it as it kind of went past. But I think we're at the point now with DXP we're in the middle of this sort of this sweeping wave of that cultural shift. Do you think that companies, where do you see the sort of the urge to adopt this sort of cultural approach, this sort of API services based approach to generate a better customer experience? where do you think people are in their decision-making process for this now?
Yeah, I mean, as much as I mentioned that it's not, not necessarily an instant monetary ROI. I do think that does lead a lot of the charge, right, away from the suites and towards best of breed sort of methodology. Yeah. And I think a lot of brands, enterprise brands especially, are beginning to see that, hey, we're paying X thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars for 6 products. We're going to use 4 of them. We're going to use 3 of them. There seems to be an emerging industry where all of these things are now decoupled and they're microservices, and we can go pick and choose. And as you mentioned, the game of the pie, we take one slice at a time. And as we grow, we can get more slices. I think it's just becoming a more cost effective. Firstly, the cost of ownership is just lower, and that's just pretty much fact most of the time. And they see that, hey, there's no real downside in the sense that there's no cap on the growth, right? So there's nothing to say that we can't eventually grow to the stage where we're using all of those products that we left. We can build them and add them on as we like, and we can even, on top of that, we can actually choose the best in the market to add on, rather than just sort of being locked into that one vendor. We can actually choose, okay, the CMS is great that we're using, but we want a CRM from company X because their CRM is the best priced and best value. Our e-commerce platform, we're going to use BigCommerce. Our sort of personalization engine, we're going to use that Finnish company you mentioned. I think it was a Finnish company. So they can actually build, again, this is what best of breed means, right? You can actually have the best of breed technology for every dimension of your company. So I think we're just reaching that tipping point, basically, where the monoliths have, they're still serving a lot of enterprises, and they're doing a good job. But for a lot of companies who are maybe not quite the Fortune 500, they're a bit lower than that, down to the sort of SMBs. I think those companies are seeing that, they've got a lower cost of ownership and a sort of higher glass ceiling, if you will, if they go down this best of breed route. So, I can't exactly remember what your question was, but hopefully that answered it.
No, you've sort of encapsulated it all, and we just sent out a link to the DXP report, which you guys put out, which is awesome. So go ahead and subscribe to that. It gets a lot more of this sort of this kind of insight, and I think you've got great insight, Kaya. So I just love having these conversations with you because you get a real insightful look from a. Oftentimes we see things from our own company and we see like what we see every day, whereas from a journalism type of point of view, you kind of talk to more people, you see more people in the industry, and a little bit more objective, and you can play devil's advocate with folks like me. I'm trying to show the benefits of Agility CMS, which is pretty easy to do these days because it comes from Headless CMS. But I get locked into that, and I fully understand that I have one point of view, and you have a kind of a higher level point of view. But thinking of the point of view of customers, and I really like the idea of where you said, maybe you're not a Fortune 500 company, or maybe you're just trying to save money on something, and that's a real thing. You can get instant ROI just by lowering your total cost of ownership of something. It's like, hey, we spend half the money and get the same thing. That's awesome. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the integrations because we didn't really jump back on that. We talked about APIs and, a little bit about how that really is the integration pieces. Platforms like Salesforce, and I would say that the reason Salesforce became sort of a software as a service behemoth is because there are so many integrations built into it. And I'm seeing more and more that companies are, putting on their integrations page for technology, hey, I'm Frosmo and I work with XYZ headless CMSs, or this headless CMS works with all these things. But I would say you don't even need to have that anymore because APIs and technologies like an API doesn't necessarily mean it will automatically work together, but you can I think you're pretty safe to assume that does mean they will work together. Do you have an API and do you have integrations? How do customers see that though? How folks that they're not developers, how are they reading that from your perspective, Kaya, of the idea when you say API to them? Are they getting that?
No, not really. The CTOs among them will understand it, of course. But if we're talking about the everyday, if you're talking about a CEO, if you're talking about the CMO, they do understand the concept. But as you go down, into sort of the content authors and the marketers in general, they're not 100% sure of how that technology works. But what they want is, and I wrote about this, it must have been like 4 or 5 years ago on CMS Wire. somebody could find it on Google. I think the title was Headless CMS, Don't Forget About the Marketers, something like that. And my argument back then is kind of still relevant today, in a sense of, at that time, again, 4 or 5 years ago, Headless CMSs were sort of just emerging. They were very much a developer tool. We're talking now about pure headless CMSs that didn't have any sort of form of content authorship, authoring environments, anything like that, any ability to edit content or preview content. So marketers were feeling really left out, obviously, right? And they were unable to sort of do the everyday tasks that they are familiar with doing without heavily relying on IT. So as far as they're concerned, if the functionality can return, which a lot of headless CMSs are spending a lot of money on bringing that functionality back, marketer-friendly features, improving UX, UI in general. Once that comes back, all marketers want is the functionality to be able to talk to their target market, right? And the ability to use their favorite tools. And both of those things are made easier with APIs. They're not necessarily interested in exactly how that happens. Maybe it's more of a developers who are more interested in that. But at the end of the day, they do want that functionality back. They want that ability back to do things without having to ask IT, right? They want to be able to publish a landing page, publish a blog post, edit it, inline editing maybe, no code tools maybe where possible, and to manage that experience as much as possible without asking anybody else. So that's what they're looking for. If APIs can bring that about by integrating tools in there, then they're totally on board, essentially.
Yeah. So those of you in the audience or listening to this as a recording, definitely, I think that what I'm hearing from Kaya, if first of all, if you're a developer, what you should be doing is building tools so that marketers, those people who are trying to talk to their audience, so that they don't need to get you involved in a continuing basis. So build a tool that ends up being a codeless thing. So if you're building, a site with a headless CMS, think about setting up components or something else like that can be composed in the CMS and sort of used throughout. And I think that's one of the things at Agility that we've been trying to enable is like marketers have rhythm like nobody's business, right? They get stuff out there and they want to change things so often. You need to get developers out of that workflow. So the development workflow happens first, and then the marketer workflow. So when marketers are choosing tools, and I think marketers and developers should work together when they choose tools, as opposed to it being sort of thrust upon either group.
Yeah.
Having worked with both, I think, I can see the point of view of both. But if a marketer is choosing a tool, I believe that, setting up something where it's like, I don't need code to be part of this. I understand that there's code involved with APIs and things like that. But to be able to do my job, to integrate all these all these services together in my business, I believe in enabling marketers. And I'm seeing the love from Olga. She's director of marketing at Agility. And I think that's, how else can we sort of enable sort of marketers to get that rhythm? Because that will help with things like when you're trying to get to personalization and saying, we need to have 17 articles a day. How can we get to that level of rhythm with our tools? I mean, I believe part of it is like, hey, let's swap out the tools that are slow for ones that are faster. But what else do you think, just kind of as one of the closing points, how else can we sort of enable marketers to, I hate to say do more, but to be more capable and be more empowered?
Yes. Again, so some of those features that we mentioned, things like being able to preview content, being able to have a what you see is what you get editor, all those kind of basics. If you can provide that to your marketing team, again, as you mentioned, if developers can focus on that, making a no-code experience, that's one great way to just streamline the process for your marketers and ensure they don't have to do anything. They can do anything without coming to you. That's one surefire way to ensure that they're going to be as autonomous as possible. Other than that, it's more about culture. It's more about facilitating data for them. So understanding that they need the data on customer segments, on the target audience in general, and they need to be able to write content for that, and they need to be able to employ teams. Again, if we're talking about personalization here, large teams to produce larger amounts of content. They also need, again, additional ability to go out and use the tools they want to use. So if they do want to go and use an external personalization engine, they need to have the ability to do that. If they want to go out and use a different digital asset management system, perhaps they want to do things like image editing online that perhaps your CMS isn't fantastic at that. They need to be able to go out and do that as seamlessly as possible. And that means, CMS, digital asset management, image editor, could be 3 different tools there. Those 3 different tools need to be able to work together as seamlessly as possible, without things getting siloed, without things getting sort of lost by the wayside. Once those kind of workflows are possible and marketers feel confident they can go out and get a tool they need and it not being like an additional silo, I think that is a big unlock for the marketers, just to give them that confidence they need to go out and do things without worrying about, the IT team coming down like a ton of bricks because things are getting too difficult to handle. Again, APIs here help a lot. So getting out of their way in those 2 ways, I think would be a massive help.
This has been great. Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome, Kaya. If there's any other questions, we haven't had a whole lot of stuff in the chat, but if you do have any questions, we're going to wrap this up in the next couple of minutes. Just a couple of closing thoughts from me. Just want to sort of, if I could, there's a lot to summarize here. So really what I think is, let's consider this the beginning of the conversation, especially between you and I, Kaya. I'd like to, hopefully, in a little while, get back into doing this again. Maybe we can get some of the folks from Gartner to come and talk about the things that they were arguing back in that report I think that report was written back in December. I don't have the link on me just at the moment, but I think we're going to be reaching out to everybody with emails. So maybe we'll include that in that report, just talk more about composable DXP. There it is right there. Thanks, Kai.
Yeah, nice.
Jump on that. Let's use this as a starting point for the conversation, and to talk more about it. There's so much to kind of dig into with this. It's a big thing. So, read the DXP report, get on there. And I think if you go on that website, you can see some of the past articles as well, to sort of kind of catch yourself up with all those things.
Not just yet, we're working on it.
Okay, so that's coming.
Yeah.
That's coming. You can definitely follow Kaya on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter at Joel Varty. Is Wordify on Twitter?
We are.
What's
Yeah.
the best way to kind of connect with you guys?
Yeah, we're definitely there at Wordify CO. No space, I believe. No underscore.
Okay. All right. So, just engage with that. Let's tech Twitter is an awesome place to be, by the way. And I want us to, let's create the DXP Twitter, let's just continue to have these conversations as kind of go back and forth as we learn new stuff. This industry is in a state of immense growth. There's so many more people coming into it. And I would say, if I was to, rush at a poll, it's how many people consider themselves sort of new and learning. First of all, I would consider myself in that group, new and learning to DXP, because there's just so much that's new every day to learn from each other. So again, let's continue the conversation. Kaya, it's been great having you. Any final thoughts from you, Kaya?
No, thank you for having me, Joel. It's been a massive pleasure for me. I hope to do it again. I did have a couple more questions, but I think we'll leave it for next time. Just some devil's advocate stuff. But that's hugely enjoyable. So thanks so much for having me. And thank you, Olga, in the comments as well.
Yes, for sure. You just might have seen one of the things in the chat that Olga put out there. There's go to agilitycms.com/events. There's more events coming. I think we have some workshops coming up, some developer stuff. So if you are a developer, or if you have a developer that's close to your heart, send them links to that to the agilitycms.com website. And until later, thanks for tuning in, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.